The drums started before sunrise. Slow, heavy, final. Every beat echoed across the valley like a warning. The giants gathered in a wide circle of stone. No one spoke loudly. No one smiled. Today was not a day of celebration. Today was a day of judgment. In the center of the valley stood a giant woman, taller than the towers behind her. Her name was Arca. Her long silver hair moved softly in the cold morning wind. Her hands were strong enough to break stone. Her shoulders were wide like mountain walls, but her eyes were empty. In giant society, there was only one true duty for women of her rank: to give birth and continue the bloodline. Strength meant survival. Children meant the future. Arca had failed. For 10 long years, the council waited. Healers came. Rituals were done. Ancient prayers were spoken. Nothing changed. She did not conceive. The high matron, leader of the valley, stood above on a stone platform. Her voice was sharp and cold. Arca of the northern line, you have failed your purpose. By the law of survival, you will be put down at sunrise. The crowd lowered their heads. No giant protested. It was tradition. The execution platform stood behind Arca, tall wood pillars with heavy iron chains. The same platform where broken warriors and weak bloodlines ended. But Arca did not cry. She did not beg. She simply stared at the sky, as if waiting for something only she could see. Some giants whispered, "She is cursed. She wasted 10 years. She brings weakness." The drums grew louder. The sun slowly began to rise behind the mountains. Golden light touched the valley floor. The high matron raised her hand. "Prepare her." 2 giant guards stepped forward. The ground shook with each heavy step. They reached for Arca's arms. And then, a voice broke through the silence. "Stop!" The word was small, but it cut through the valley like a blade. The drums stopped. Every giant turned. At the edge of the circle stood something almost invisible beside their massive bodies. A human. Small, thin, fragile. He walked forward without shaking. His boots crushed tiny stones under his feet. He looked like nothing compared to the giants. A single careless step from them could end him. Yet he did not slow down. The guard froze. The high matron stared down at him with confusion. "Who speaks?" she demanded. The human lifted his head. His eyes were calm, not angry, not afraid. "Ido." Murmurs spread across the valley. Humans rarely entered giant territory, and when they did, they never spoke during judgment. The matron's voice grew cold. "This is not your matter, little one. Leave before you are removed." The human stopped directly in front of Arca. He was so small that her shadow completely covered him. He looked up at her. For the first time that morning, Arca's eyes moved away from the sky. She looked down at him. Something changed in her expression. Not hope, but curiosity. The human then turned to face the council. "I claim her." Silence fell, so hard it felt heavy. Even the wind stopped. Some giants gasped. Others laughed in disbelief. The matron narrowed her eyes. "You dare speak the law of claiming?" "I do," the human said calmly. The law of claiming was ancient. If someone claimed a condemned giant, they had 1 moon cycle to prove that the giant had value beyond reproduction. If they failed, both would die. The matron leaned forward. "Why would you claim a broken giant?" The human's voice did not shake. "She is not broken." The crowd began to whisper louder. The matron studied him carefully. "You risk your life for this?" "Yes. And if you fail, then we both fall." Arca stared at him. No one had ever stood before the council for her. No one had ever said she was not broken. The sun fully rose. Golden light touched her face. The matron slowly lowered her raised hand. 1 moon cycle, she announced. "Prove her worth, or both of you die." The drums began again. But this time, they did not sound final. They sounded like the beginning of something dangerous. Arca looked down at the human. "Why?" she asked quietly. He gave a small smile. "Because they only measure one kind of strength." And somewhere above them, the clouds began to move. The valley did not sleep that night. The news spread like fire. A human had claimed the infertile giantess. Some giants laughed. Some were angry. Some were afraid. No one understood why. Arca stood at the edge of the high cliffs, staring down at the dark forest below. The moonlight made her silver hair shine. Behind her, the human stood quietly. His name was Elias. He looked very small next to her, but he did not look weak. "You should not have done this," Arca said without looking at him. Her voice was deep but calm. "You will die because of me." Elias stepped closer to the edge. The wind pushed against him, but he stood firm. "I chose this," he said. Arca slowly turned her head toward him. "For what reason?" Elias did not answer immediately. He studied the valley below, the stone houses, the training grounds, the giant towers. "For truth," he finally said. The next morning, the council gathered again. The high matron stood tall, holding a long staff carved with ancient symbols. "The law of claiming has been spoken," she announced. "1 moon cycle, 30 days. If the giantess shows value beyond reproduction, she lives. If she fails, both will be executed." The giants roared in approval. To them, this was entertainment. A human trying to save what they had already judged useless. The matron looked down at Elias. "How will you prove her worth, little man?" Elias stepped forward without fear. "You measure strength only by birth," he said. "But strength has many forms." The crowd murmured again. "Speak clearly," the matron demanded. Elias pointed toward the far edge of the valley. "Beyond the cliffs are the ancient ruins. Your people ignore them. You call them cursed." Several giants shifted uncomfortably. Those ruins were old, older than the giant bloodlines. No one understood them. "They're useless stone," one warrior shouted. Elias shook his head. "Or maybe you simply never try to understand them." The matron's eyes narrowed. "And what does this have to do with her?" Elias turned and looked up at Arca. "She understands the symbols carved in those ruins." The valley grew quiet. Arca stiffened. She had never told anyone that. Years ago, when she trained alone, she had studied the strange markings on the broken machines near the forest. The shapes felt familiar, like forgotten language. But no one cared. No one listened. "You lie," a giant healer said. "She has no such skill." Elias did not argue. Instead, he pulled a small metal piece from his pocket, a fragment taken from the ruins. He held it up. "Ask her what this symbol means." All eyes turned to Arca. She hesitated. For years, she believed her only worth was in giving birth. She had hidden every other talent because it did not matter. But now, a small human stood between her and death. Slowly, she stepped forward. She looked at the metal piece. Her fingers gently traced the carved lines. "It means shield," she said quietly. A few giants laughed. Elias raised his voice. "And what does the second symbol mean?" Arca looked again. "Energy. Protection from sky fire." The laughter stopped. The valley had a history of terrible lightning storms that destroyed homes and crops. Elias turned to the council. "You fear the storms every year. You rebuild every year. What if the ruins are not curses? What if they are protection?" The matron remained silent. Elias continued. "You call her infertile. You call her useless. But you never asked what else she could offer." The wind moved strongly across the valley. Arca felt something strange inside her chest. Not shame, not fear, something else. Possibility. The matron finally spoke. "If this is your path, human, then prove it. Use her so-called knowledge. Show us something real before the moon fades." Elias nodded. "We will." The council dismissed them. As the giants walked away, some whispered, "He is mad. She will fail. They will both die." But for the first time in many years, Arca did not feel broken. She looked down at Elias. "Why do you believe in me?" she asked. Elias met her eyes without hesitation. "Because when they looked at you, they saw failure. When I looked at you, I saw someone thinking." Far above them, clouds slowly gathered on the horizon, and neither of them noticed how dark the sky was becoming. The ruins stood beyond the forest, silent and forgotten. No giant like coming here. The stone was black and cold. Broken towers leaned like tired warriors. Strange metal shapes were buried in the earth. The air always felt different, heavy like it carried old memories. Arca had come here many times alone. When the other giants trained for battle or prepared for festivals, she walked among the ruins in silence. She traced the strange symbols with her fingers. She listened to the wind passing through broken machines. It was the only place where she did not feel judged. Now, she stood there again, but this time, Elias was with her. He looked very small between the massive metal structures. Yet his eyes were sharp, watching everything carefully. "You said this symbol means shield," Elias said, pointing a large stone panel half covered in moss. Arca nodded. "And that one means sky-fire." Elias stepped closer to the panel. He brushed dirt away with his hands. "If shield and sky-fire are written together, what does that mean?" Arca studied it carefully. "It means protection from storms." Elias smiled slightly. "And the valley fears storms every year." Arca looked at him, confused. "You think these ruins can stop the storms?" "I think," Elias said slowly, "your people stopped trying to understand them." Back in the valley, dark clouds began forming on the horizon. The giants noticed. The storm season was not supposed to come for another month. The High Matron stood on the tower wall, watching the sky carefully. "This feels wrong," one warrior said. The matron did not answer. Instead, she turned toward the ruins. "If the human lies," she whispered, "the storm will prove it." At the ruins, Elias was examining a large circular structure in the center of the broken city. It looked like a giant ring of metal buried in stone. Lines of symbols ran along its edges. Arca felt her heart beating faster. She had seen this structure before, but she had never touched it. "It feels alive," she said quietly. Elias placed his hand on the cold metal. "Maybe it is sleeping." He pointed at a small opening near the base of the ring. "Can you read that?" Arca knelt down. The earth shook slightly as she lowered herself. She brushed away dust. The symbols were clear now. "Energy core," she said. "Input required." Elias looked up at her. "Input what?" Arca hesitated. She closed her eyes and tried to remember every symbol she had ever studied here. "Power from within," she whispered. Elias frowned. That could mean many things. Suddenly, thunder rolled across the sky. Both of them looked up. The clouds were darker now, moving faster. The wind became stronger. Arca stood. "The storm is early," she said. Lightning flashed in the distance. Elias looked back at the structure. "If this machine is what I think it is, we don't have much time." Arca felt fear rising inside her. Not fear of death. Fear of failure. "If I am wrong," she began. Elias turned to her sharply. "You are not broken," he said firmly. "You just never had the chance to be more." Another thunder strike shook the ruins. Small rocks fell from nearby walls. Arca looked at the ring again. The symbol for shield repeated around its edge. She placed her massive hand against the center of the metal. The surface felt cold at first. Then, warm. Very faint, but real. "It reacts to touch," she said. Elias' eyes widened. "Then maybe it reacts to life." Back in the valley, giants were rushing to secure homes and gather supplies. The storm clouds were almost above them now. The High Matron looked toward the ruins again. "If they fail," she said quietly, "we lose more than 2 lives." Lightning struck the forest edge. A tree exploded into flames. The ground trembled. At the ruins, Arca pressed both hands against the metal ring. The symbols began to glow faintly under her touch. Her heart pounded. "I feel something," she whispered. Elias stepped back as wind circled around the structure. "What do you feel?" Arca opened her eyes. Like it was waiting, the glowing lines grew brighter. The storm roared closer. And for the first time in giant history, the ancient ruins began to wake up. The sky turned black. Not dark like night, but heavy, angry black. The wind screamed through the valley, bending trees and shaking stone towers. Lightning tore across the sky like white cracks in the world. The giants had seen storms before, but not like this. "This is not natural," one warrior shouted. The High Matron stood firm on the wall, though her robes whipped wildly around her. "Prepare for impact," she commanded. Thunder exploded overhead. At the ruins, Arca's hands were still pressed against the glowing metal ring. The ancient symbols now burned with bright blue light. The wind circled around her body, pulling her hair high into the air. Elias could barely stand. He grabbed onto a broken pillar to avoid being thrown back. "Arca," he shouted. "What is happening?" Her voice trembled, but not from fear. "It is responding, but something is missing." Lightning struck the ground only a short distance away. The The shockwave knocked Elias to his knees. The glowing symbols flickered. Arca felt panic rising inside her. She had never activated anything before. She only understood the symbols, not how to make them live. The storm roared louder. Rain began pouring in sheets, so thick it blurred the world. Back in the valley, the first lightning strike hit a guard tower. Stone exploded. Giant screamed. The matron clenched her jaw. Retreat to the inner circle. But there was nowhere safe. This storm was too strong. At the ruins, the glowing ring began to dim. No, Arca whispered. She felt the warmth fading under her palms. Elias forced himself to stand despite the violent wind. Think, he shouted. You said it needed input. Yes, Arca cried. Power from within. Then give it power. Arca froze. Give it power? She was not a machine. She was not magic. She was only... The thought stopped. Only what? Only infertile? Only broken? Only useless? Another bolt of lightning struck, close enough to throw them both backward. The ruins shook violently. Arca fell to one knee, and in that moment, something inside her changed. All her life, she had believed her body had failed its purpose. But what if her purpose was never what they thought? She looked at the glowing symbols again. Shield, protection, energy, life. She slowly stood back up. I will not fail, she whispered. She placed both hands firmly against the center of the ring again. This time, she did not hesitate. She closed her eyes and focused on her heartbeat. Slow, strong, alive. She pushed forward, not with muscle but with will. The metal beneath her hands grew hot. The blue light exploded across the entire ring. Lines of energy shot outward along the ground, racing toward tall, broken towers around the ruins. Elias shielded his face as light burst upward into the sky. In the valley, giants looked up in shock. A beam of blue energy shot from the ruins into the clouds. The storm roared in anger. Then, a massive dome of light spread across the valley like a rising sun. Lightning struck it instantly, but instead of hitting the ground, it spread across the dome like water on glass. The wind slammed into the shield. The shield held. Rain hit the glowing barrier and slid away. Inside the valley, the air became calm. Outside, the storm screamed and clawed like a wild beast. The giants stared in disbelief. The High Matron's staff slipped slightly in her grip. She did this, one warrior whispered. At the ruins, Arca stood in the center of blinding blue light. Energy flowed through her arms, into the machine, into the sky. It did not hurt. It felt right, as if the ruins had been waiting for her all along. Elias looked up at her in awe. You weren't meant to give life, he said softly. You were meant to protect it. The storm fought harder. Lightning struck again and again, but the shield did not break. Minutes passed. Then slowly, the thunder faded. The wind weakened. The black clouds began to pull away. The dome of light slowly dimmed until it disappeared completely. Silence filled the valley. No destroyed homes. No fallen towers. No dead giants. Only stunned faces. Arca lowered her hands. The ruins went quiet again. She swayed slightly, exhausted. Elias rushed to her side. In the valley, the High Matron dropped to one knee. For the first time in giant history, the infertile giantess had saved them all. The storm was gone. But the valley was not the same. The shield of light had protected every home. No towers had fallen. No children were lost. The giants stood in silence, staring at the faint glow that still hovered above the ruins like a memory of power. Arca stood at the center of the valley now. Not in chains, not under judgment, but under watchful eyes. Some giants looked at her with respect. Others looked at her with fear. The High Matron stepped forward slowly. You saved the valley, she said. Her voice was calm, but heavy. But saving once does not erase failure. The word failure cut through the air. Arca felt the old shame rise again. Before she could speak, Elias stepped forward. She was never a failure. Murmurs spread again. The matron looked down at him. Explain. Elias held up a small glass container filled with water from the valley river. For years, he said, your birth numbers have fallen. Not just hers. Many families have struggled. The healer shifted uncomfortably. That is weakness in bloodlines, the healer said. Elias shook his head. No, it is something in the water. The valley grew quiet. Elias continued. The ancient ruins were built for protection, but they were also built to filter the valley's water. The storm activated the shield, and the shield activated the old systems beneath the ground. Some giants frowned. They did not understand. Arca stepped forward slowly. The symbol for shield was connected to another symbol, she said carefully. Life flow. She pointed toward the river. Since the storm ended, the water tastes different. A young giant mother stepped forward nervously. It does, she whispered. It feels lighter. The healer quickly walked toward the river with a testing stone. He dipped it into the water. The stone glowed faint green. Gasps filled the valley. It is purified, the healer said in shock. The matron's grip tightened on her staff. Elias spoke clearly now. The water was slowly harming reproduction, weakening bodies, causing failure. He turned and looked up at Arca. But her body adapted. Silence fell again. She did not fail, Elias continued. She survived. The idea was heavy. If this was true, then the entire council had judged wrongly. The matron's voice became colder. You claim her body changed? That she is different? Arca lifted her chin. I always felt stronger in the river than others, she said quietly. I could stay longer. I did not feel sick. The healer slowly nodded. There were signs, he admitted. But we believed she was simply stubborn. The crowd began whispering louder. She is immune. She is chosen. She carries new strength. But not all voices were kind. One warrior stepped forward angrily. So now weakness becomes special, he shouted. We change law because of one storm. The tension returned instantly. The valley had always followed tradition. Birth meant value. Nothing else. The warrior pointed at Elias. This human has poisoned your minds. Several warriors agreed. The matron raised her staff. Enough. The valley fell silent. She looked at Arca carefully. For generations, we survive by simple law. Produce or perish. She paused. But if the law was built on misunderstanding, her words trailed off. Elias spoke more softly now. Strength is not only in giving life, he said. Sometimes strength is in protecting it. The purified river flowed quietly behind them. For the first time in many seasons, hope did not feel forced. But change is dangerous, and fear spreads faster than truth. The warrior who spoke earlier stepped back, but his eyes burned with anger. This is not finished, he muttered. The matron turned toward the gathered giants. The moon cycle is not over, she declared. One final trial will decide. Arca's heart tightened. A trial? She asked. Yes, the matron said firmly. If you are evolution, if you are the future, then you must prove it before all. The crowd stirred again. The matron raised her voice. Tomorrow at dawn. The trial of strength. Arca looked down at Elias. What kind of trial? She asked quietly. Elias did not look afraid. Not the kind they expect, he said. Above them, the sky was finally clear. But inside the valley, something greater than a storm was forming. Change. And not everyone was ready for it. Dawn came cold and silent. The valley gathered again, but this time there were no drums. There was only tension. At the far edge of the valley stood the broken canyon. A deep stone pass filled with falling rocks, sharp cliffs, and unstable ground. Many warriors trained there. Many were injured there. Today it would decide Arca's fate. The high matron stood before the crowd. The trial of strength begins, she announced. Not a muscle, not a birth, but of leadership. Murmurs spread quickly. Leadership? The matron continued. A team of 5 warriors will enter the canyon. They must cross it and return before sunset. Arca will guide them. The warriors chosen were strong, but not kind to her in the past. One of them was the same warrior who had spoken against her. He looked at her with cold eyes. If she fails, he said loudly, we fall with her. Arca did not answer. Elias stepped beside her quietly. This is what they fear most, he whispered. Not your power, your mind. Arca took a slow breath. For years she trained alone, studied alone, thought alone. Now she would lead. The canyon entrance was narrow and dark. Wind rushed through it like a warning. The 5 warriors stood ready. Move, Arca said calmly. They entered. Inside the canyon, the air felt tight and heavy. Loose rocks covered the ground. Above them, tall cliffs leaned inward dangerously. The warrior in front tried to lead by strength, pushing forward quickly. Stop, Arca called. He ignored her. Seconds later, the ground shifted beneath his feet. Stones slid down from above. Back, Arca shouted. The team pulled him away just before large rocks crashed down. Dust filled the air. The warrior glared at her. You caused delay. No, Arca said firmly. You almost caused death. She stepped forward now. Her eyes studied the canyon walls. She noticed small cracks and patterns. She felt the direction of the wind. She remembered the symbol for shift from the ruins. This canyon moves with the wind, she said. We go when it rests. They waited. 10 seconds later, another section of cliff collapsed where they would have walked. The warriors fell silent. They continued carefully. At a narrow ledge, the path split in two. One side looked shorter. The other looked safer. The angry warrior pointed. We take the short path. Arca shook her head. The wind pushes from that side. It weakens the stone. He stepped toward it anyway. Before his foot touched the ledge, Arca grabbed his arm. The ground beneath the short path suddenly broke apart and fell into darkness. The warrior froze. Slowly, he stepped back. They took the longer route. Hours passed. Each time danger approached, Arca predicted it. When the wind changed direction, she moved the team lower. When small pebbles began falling, she ordered them against the canyon wall. She was not faster than them, not stronger, but she was aware. Near the end of the canyon, the final challenge waited. A stone bridge cracked across the middle. Below it, sharp rocks waited. The warriors looked uncertain. If we run together, it may hold, one suggested. Arca studied the bridge. No, she said. Weight must be balanced. She placed the strongest warrior in the center. The lighter ones moved along the sides. She crossed last. Halfway across, the bridge cracked loudly. Keep moving, she commanded calmly. They moved exactly as she instructed. The bridge held just long enough. They reached the other side safely. By sunset, they returned to the valley. Not one warrior injured. Not one mistake fatal. The crowd stared in silence. The high matron stepped forward slowly. You led without force, she said. The angry warrior stepped ahead of the others. He knelt. She saved us, he admitted. A wave of whispers spread across the valley. Arca stood tall, not proud, not angry, just steady. The matron looked at the crowd. 4 generations, we believed strength meant birth and battle. She turned toward Arca. Today we witnessed another kind. She lowered her staff. Arca of the northern line, you are no longer under judgment. The valley erupted, some cheering, some stunned into silence. Elias looked up at her with a small smile. You didn't break, he said quietly. Arca looked out across her people. No, she replied, and neither will they. But deep in the crowd, a few giants still watched with uneasy eyes. Because change had arrived. And change never ends with one victory. The valley felt different. Not because the mountains had moved. Not because the river had changed its path. But because the way giants looked at one another had shifted. Arca no longer walked alone. Where once whispers followed her, now respectful silence followed instead. Some called her Stormcaller. Others called her Shield of the Valley. But she did not care about titles. She cared about what was changing. The purified river now flowed clearly through the center of the valley. The old systems beneath the ruins continued working quietly. Crops grew stronger. The air felt lighter. And something else began to happen. Families who had struggled for years started to see hope. The healer reported improvements. Strength returning. Life returning. The giants began studying the ancient ruins instead of fearing them. And Arca led them. She did not lead from a throne. She led from the ground, teaching warriors how to read wind patterns, teaching builders how to study stone pressure, teaching mothers how to test water purity. She was not giving birth. She was protecting the future in another way. But not everything was peaceful. Change always leaves questions behind. One evening, as the sun painted the valley gold, the high matron approached Arca near the cliffs. You have reshaped our thinking, the matron said quietly. Arca bowed her head slightly. I only did what I understood. The matron studied her carefully. For generations, we believed survival meant control. Control of blood. Control of birth. She looked toward the children playing near the river. But perhaps survival means understanding. Arca said nothing, because deep inside, she was still healing from years of shame. Elias stood at the edge of the valley, his small pack resting beside him. He had stayed through the moon cycle. He had stayed through the storm. He had stayed through the trial. But he was not Giant, and this was not his home. Arca approached him slowly. You are leaving, she said. It was not a question. Elias smiled gently. Yes. The wind moved between them. You changed everything, Arca said quietly. Elias shook his head. No, you did. She looked down at him. Why did you really claim me? She asked. Not for law. Not for trial. Why? Elias looked out across the valley. When I first saw you, he said, everyone else saw failure. He turned and met her eyes. But you were the only one looking at the sky. She frowned slightly. I do not understand. You were not broken, he said softly. You were thinking beyond what they allowed. Silence settled between them. For people who feel different, Elias continued, the world often calls them weak. But sometimes they're simply early. Arca felt something tight in her chest. Not sadness. Not pride. Gratitude. You risked your life, she said. Elias gave a small laugh.